And speak to our correspondent Gulliver Cragg. Gulliver, what's the latest news from the Ukrainian capital where you are? After weeks of nightly attacks, it seems like the situation there has somewhat calmed down a bit.
Actually, there have been 2 nights in a row now where the sirens did not go off in the middle of the night across the whole of Ukraine. That's becoming the exception rather than the rule ever since Russia started its campaign of targeting electricity infrastructure across the country since the 10th of October. So last night, it seems that there were no major attacks, but there were clearly some attempted attacks because there was a fire that broke out in a petrol station in the eastern city of Dnipro after pieces of a rocket fell on it. We presume that that means that it's a rocket that was shot down by Ukraine's air defense forces. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens, even shooting down the rocket can cause severe damage. In this particular case, the explosion of the petrol station left 2 people dead. But there were no reports of attacks on electricity infrastructure, at least not in areas far away from the front line. Of course, still some 30% of the country's electricity infrastructure is damaged, and that means that these rolling blackouts across Ukraine, affecting most areas for at least a few hours a day, are still continuing.
And Gulliver, speaking of that damaged infrastructure, Ukraine's Western allies have already begun discussing a plan to rebuild Ukraine. What is Ukraine hoping to see out of those discussions?
Well, $17 billion to be precise. That's what Volodymyr Zelensky said the country needs just for its immediate reconstruction plan. He's not talking about longer-term assistance, but for rebuilding the essential things such as that electricity, infrastructure, schools, roads, hospitals, basic things that the country needs. He says they've got a plan and they want $17 billion to fund it. He says that they haven't received any funding in this direction at the moment. Ukraine has, of course, been receiving lots of military aid from its Western allies, and Volodymyr Zelensky and his Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal outlined an idea that the West could start coordinating its financial reconstruction assistance to Ukraine in the same way that it coordinates its military assistance by creating a sort of format which they call the Ramstein format because of the first place where there was this major meeting. It was in Germany to decide on military aid for Ukraine. The Ukrainian government are saying that they could do something similar for financial aid. One thing that people in Kiev talk about really a lot actually these days is what happens if Ukraine does manage to get back the whole of Donbass, including the parts that have been occupied since 2014 and whose populations have been subjected since 2014 to really, really strong anti-Ukrainian Russian propaganda and are, unlike people in other occupied areas of Ukraine, likely in their majority to be highly pro-Russian. What to do to get them back on side? And the answer everybody gives is money. Ukraine really hopes that Ukraine's Western allies will realize that a huge amount of funding is going to be needed for the reconstruction of Donbass.
All right, Gulliver, thank you very much for that update. France 24's Gulliver Cragg bringing us the latest from Ukraine.